Hello tubers, I have done a whole process of this all on video, but I think I'm just going to do it on this one video now because it's going to get too long otherwise. What this basically is my Mark 7 2.2 litre transit van, and the engine stopped on me a few weeks ago, and I thought it was just something to do with the fuel, but through various investigations I found out it had bloody seized. You would never believe it. It seized, and there was hardly any noise. It was like it run out of diesel. So what actually happened, I've got the engine out since then, and this is the timing cover now. The timing chain was okay, but there was a little chain going down here, down this gap, turning the oil pump, and that had broke. And I think the oil pump was faulty and it was sticking and whatever. That timing chain broke. It wasn't sending oil round to the top of the engine and the bottom of the engine, and it must have seized. It didn't go hot or anything. So I think the crank has seized, but I haven't got far enough in there yet. So I came to a bit of a stop the other day because it's got some weird bolts on there, and I've just got some sockets to take that off. And just to let you know, you can't get at the crank to do anything with the crank while it's in the vehicle, because this little bottom bit here, I had all the bolts out of there, but it won't drop because there's behind the flywheel there's about 2 or 4 bolts that hold this section on. So if you want to do anything with the crank on a Transit 2.2 litre engine, Euro I think it is, you're going to have to take the engine out and take that off to undo them few bolts on the seal, holding the engine seal in before that bit will drop. And I'm going to do that now to see if it's a crank. This is the top of the engine, and when I opened this up I could see the oil hadn't been going round. So hopefully it hasn't seized in the engine and it's just spun a bearing on the crank, but I can't see without taking a bit, whatever. So anyway, I've got this out of the engine out of the van. I haven't took the gearbox out. I'm sure there's an easier way to do it, but this is how I did it. I pulled it out here and sort of lifted it up like that and twisted it, and it came out okay. But what I wanted to show you, these points here are the same on both sides of the transit van, the Mark 7, and my cousin's van that I had in here a few weeks ago had exactly the same thing, where this has rotted out. Water stays in there. So what you need to do now, these are the problems with transit vans, look. They've got a chassis that holds water. It's mental. So while this is off, we're going to try and sort this all out and obviously grind it off. Anything that needs changing will change, weld up, and then spray it all up again. But check that on your van. And also here, this stuff holds moisture in and holds it against these panels, and that's where they rot. The one on this side has got the mudguard on that side. It will be worse because all the earth is going through there. And just a point of fact, every single electrical fault that I've had with this van and my cousin's Mark 7 van have been from the earth. From not starting to going dead, it's all been from the earth. I changed that front mudguard on my cousin's van because it had rotted out, and as soon as I changed that and put new earth on it, it worked perfect. So there we are. Right, we're going to start to diagnose to see what is wrong with that engine. I'm going to take them flywheel off and see if it's the crank or the piston seized. Okay, this is just to show you why that bottom section won't come off while it's in the vehicle. You've undone this section, look, from the front, but there's 4 small little cap screws holding that bearing in, and you can't drop it down because of that. It's fucking infuriating, because you could have done the crank if it's spun a bearing with it still in the vehicle only for them little screws. Really is maddening. I don't know if it'll be possible to leave them out after, I'm not sure. But it'd be worth thinking about it, because if you have a spun bearing again, then you can just drop this bottom section and get to the crank, and if it's just one bearing spun, you can deal with it there without taking the engine out. But we'll have to see. I'll take these out now. I drop this section and see if we've got a spun crank bearing. Okay. Right guys, that is the piece off the bottom of the engine. It's like a ladder over top of the crank, which you can't get at anything without getting that off. And the only thing stopping that to come off is, like I said to you before, 4 little bolts that go in the bottom there. And you've got to get the engine out to get them, to be able to get that off and get at the crank. Infuriating. Anyway, here is the crank. I have a job to see what's going on there at the moment. I'll have to get the engine onto something. It does look like they are very dry to me, especially them 2 middle ones. But I'm going to have to get the engine onto something so I can whip this off and see if the pistons are gone or this crank has gone. Right guys and gals, we've got the patient on the operating table. This is a 2.2 transit diesel engine. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take these bolts off the various things and keeping them in order in boxes and things here and keeping them clean, and then release the crank to see if it's the crank or the pistons that have seized. At the moment I can't even move the crank at all, so we'll soon see. I don't want to take the head off yet, in case it's just this. So when we go a bit further on, I will show you how I'm getting on. Right then, we took these off. A couple of these shells, especially here, 1, 2, 3. Oh, they have gone. The main ones are scratched only. Not so much on there, but the actual shells themselves have gone. Listen, I'm no expert at this sort of thing. I'm just trying to get my van going. So don't complain at me for not doing things right. Got to be honest, they don't seem bad, the crank itself on them bits, that the shells this end seem to have gone. I've got the one on there to stop it falling out at the moment. So we're going to take off the shells on the actual piston rods now and see how that is and see if this thing will release, because it's still rock solid. So we'll see now in a minute. Whoop, shit. Any of you are interested, it's spun a bearing there. You can see. Well, basically spun a shell, they call them, or lots of people call them bearings. It's gone around 1/4 of an inch, and look at all the mess there. That one seems okay. And that one. Sorry, it's a job to show you. That one's moved a bit. And that one has moved a little bit as well. And believe it or not, this crank is totally free now and I still can't move it. So it's actually seized to that one there, I think. The very first one from this side. So at the very least we're going to have to change all the shells, but it looks to me like this crank on this one here is absolutely banjacks to me. But we'll see now when you get a bit further in. Right, pop pickers, we have found the problem. It's the shells on this first piston, which is on the one on the flywheel side, have spun and welded to the crank itself. You can see that. Sorry, it's a job to show you in the light here today. There's a torch. See? That's on the crank. All the other shells, I'm not saying they're not worn a little bit, but not a great deal. They are salvageable. but this one has really welded itself to the crank, so I think the crank is probably toast. And also the bottom of the piston rod has had the same treatment. Look, the other ones are okay, nothing wrong with anything else, all the pistons are free, even the piston on that side, but the bottom of the piston rod where the bearing is spun has wore. So you probably have to end up changing that rod, but all the pistons are okay, they all moving. So that is what seized my engine, that one little wanking bastard cunt there. Fucked my whole engine up. Sorry about the swearing, but bollocks cunt bastard. So this could be dead now unless I can get a crank for it, or it may be cheaper just to buy another engine. Okay. Well, hello friends, I just thought I'd show you this. This is how an engine, a spun bearing, gets destroyed. I've just literally pulled this off here now. Sorry, it's a job to show you, but if you look, the bearing is spun, and then that has filled up the oil hole with all shite. So there's no oil getting to the bearing at all. And that's why the crank and that have come, crank and the bearing have welded itself together. So I'm not 100% sure of the cause here. The chain going to the oil pump was broken, so obviously there was no oil going round there. But I'm sort of going to think that this bearing has just spun on its own because it happened so quick, and this has spun, seized, come to a stop, and maybe broke a chain on the oil pump. But I don't know. I don't think so. But more likely that the chain is broke and then due to the problem in the oil pump and then caused this, but I don't know. So we're going to get this off now. It looks like it's too far gone to me. I'm going to need a new crank, but this is the only one that's gone, so the rest of the motor is okay. I've got a little bit of a few scuffs in here where it's spun, but I think that'll be okay. I don't want to take everything apart, see, so you can get a new crank on eBay with all new shells for this side and that side for £240. So I can get a new crank, which will be back to standard size again. So I mean, all these bearings will be original. So should really change that rod there. But I don't want to take the top end apart because we're going to get into £1,000 then, and I don't want to spend £1,000 on this thing.